Hi everyone, Randy Wilson, Chief Marketing Officer at Conga, and today I'm pleased to be joined by Jeff Ford, who is the Senior Vice President of Revenue Operations at Conga, and we're going to be talking about revenue operations. So Jeff, let's start with this. How would you define revenue operations as a function? How is it different than sales operations, and what's really behind this shift?
Hi Randy, glad to be here with you. If it's okay, I'll start with the latter part first. So what is behind the shift? So sales always has some form of art to it, but particularly in the world of B2B sales, the world has just frankly gotten a lot more interesting and a lot more complex. Data availability in B2B is starting to converge the worlds of what's more classically been referred to as B2C and the go-to-market motions that are associated with going after consumers versus businesses. The second thing I might say there is that there's tons of new applications available, right? So this data is really coming from the proliferation of applications that are available to assist sales and sales operations. So we're all familiar with CRMs. That's clearly one of them. And then there's tons of applications off of CRM as well that enable teams to do things like generate quotes, execute contracts, even things like conversational intelligence are all applications that are driving efficiency. The world of sales is also now getting into intent data and focused around intent data to signal where customers are looking for particular solutions so that organizations can be a little bit more targeted in what they're going after. Most organizations have a kind of broad market application for what they do. And if you're talking about the potential of serving hundreds of thousands of potential customers, being able to understand kind of where to point the arrow drives a tremendous amount of operational efficiency and improvement of cost within an organization. Third, I would mention that organizations have tended to become somewhat siloed. There are finance organizations and customer service organizations and brand to your function marketing organizations, and more, the operational barriers between these things are coming down. Randy, you and I interface a lot on go-to-market and overall demand generation. Finance, it's critical to be working cross-functionally with finance to make sure like bookings policies and whatnot are streamlined and adhered to. Customer success is part of the overall model of driving a customer experience, and the intersection between sales and customer experience is critical. And last, I might say, when you think about the amount of change with these new applications and new systems and new processes and tremendous amounts of data that's now available, it invokes the thought of change management. And the revenue operations function is really not only a change agent for sales that can drive and help the sales organization execute, but their real job is to make sure that change takes foot. It's being measured, that it's being, that it's really truly becoming part of a business. So I think that the difference between sales and sales operations, to answer your question, is really, and this isn't a slide at sales operations, it's a part of revenue operations. I think the easiest way to think of it is revenue operations is really about creating the news, and sales operations is really about more reporting the news. The role has expanded in recent years. So things that may have even been owned by other functional areas. So customer data, as an example. Typically now under the charter of revenue operations, typically that was owned by an IT organization. Revenue data, typically owned by finance, still partially owned or co-owned by finance, but owned also by revenue operations as a means to go execute and delivering your go-to-market. Enablement, typically that was a function that was built into sales leadership and not something that was a standalone function. That's a function that reports to revenue operations. And then the real big one, of course, is go-to-market strategy. Typically was owned by sales leadership, now part of revenue operations. And I think what that created was, if you look at different sales areas, different sales region, was some discontinuity in the business, and things weren't being standardized at a level where you could at least capitalize on best practices. So all of those things together, new systems, new operational processes, new things to be co-owned and collaborated with other departments, and then consolidating functional areas around customer data, revenue data, et cetera, has really given the rise to this revenue operations function to make sure that they're really a business partner to the sales practice.
So, Jeff, you've been with Conga about a year now. What have been some of your major focuses and goals during that time?
Yeah, good question, Randy. Thankfully, I guess quite a lot. They say that being busy is better than the alternative. So I'll kind of walk you through some of the things that we've been really focused on in the last year, and in no particular order. But the first thing is, and again, I mentioned that data is critically important. Having a customer data and engagement platform is something that has been critical to sales execution and growth. And that means making sure that we have the right accounts, the right hierarchies, that everything is in our CRM correctly, and that we can go execute and understand the relationships between Conga and customers and prospects is tremendously important. Second thing that we've been really focused on is putting the right measurements, dashboards, and KPIs in place. You can't execute without measurement. And it's critically important to make sure that you're measuring the business appropriately and have the right KPIs set up to be able to measure sales execution and growth. The third thing I would mention is really focused around simplification of sales process and alignment of teams necessary to be seen as being easy to do business with, and to streamline deal execution. Critically important, again, that sales organizations I don't know any sales organization out there whose macro focus isn't growth. And in order to grow, it's really important that those operational barriers come down, and simplifying our deal processes and working cross-functionally, again, with finance and with some other organizations to make sure that we're executing on deals, tremendously important to growth. We're also focused on putting together the right compensation plans to make sure that we're executing the right long-term deals to execute growth for Conga. Conga is also ultimately a merger between two different companies. So Conga and Aptus came together, and for a while we were focused, we were driving the business really through two different customer relationship management platforms in Salesforce. And consolidation of those instances has been a really core focus of mine since I've been here. I'm glad to say that we're now on one instance, and really important because the data that comes from these systems drives your execution in the business and helps you inform where you have opportunities in the business. Now functioning on one single application, tremendously important for us. Also, standing up a new go-to-market motion. We have set up a go-to-market motion where we have multiple prospecting owners in the business, and we want to make sure that they're collaborative and not tripping on each other in their go-to-market efforts. That everybody is incremental to everybody else, and that we're driving operational efficiency through the way that we go to market. That's something that we've stood up here in the last 6 months. And I guess lastly, I would say lots of focus on cross-sell and upsell. So new logos are of course important for any business, but so is making sure that you're maximizing your relationships with your existing customers. And tremendous focus for us around cross-sell and upsell efforts to make sure that we're fully leveraging the relationships with our existing customers.
So you mentioned measurement, dashboards, KPIs. Which KPIs are most instrumental and important for you to measure in order to achieve your goals?
Yeah, great question, Randy. There's a number of them. As I'm thinking through your question, there's probably 8 of them that come to mind. So the first one is simply the demand generation engine in a company. Are you creating enough pipeline, and do you have enough at-bats to make sure that you're hitting your sales goals? Secondly, critical for any sales organization is to make sure that you are achieving your plan. And so overall sales as a ratio to what your plan is or what your bookings targets are is very important. In between those two, which is creating pipeline and what you're actually selling, are conversion rates. So while improvement in close rate is often a terrible strategy, we need to constantly focus on win rates and what that says about what our customer experience is and how what it is that we're selling is resonating with the market. Fourth, I would say we look at the percentage of sales. I mentioned this before, that comes from cross-sell, from upsell, and from new logo. So measuring each of those independently and making sure that we're executing on each independently is important to continuing to grow the business. Sales retention is also very, very important. The way that you go to market is either sort of efficient or inefficient, and that has all sorts of implications on not only your customer experience, which impacts your growth rates and your sales rates of either cross-sell, upsell, or potentially even new logo if the customer experience isn't great, it also impacts your employee experience. And so measuring attrition rates that are regrettable from an organization, very important. Sales teams cannot replace tons and tons of headcount and be able to go to market well and grow the business. You can't constantly be focused your energies on training and enabling new people. Everybody has a ramp time. And so avoiding regrettable attrition is something I would say is something that we're measuring very, very tightly and is important to the business. Customer acquisition costs are very important. So we measure CAC ratios, and we do it as a percentage of what your total sales and marketing expenses compared to what your overall booking in any given year on an ACV basis, and trying to continue to drive customer acquisition costs ratios up where your revenue as a percentage of costs is continuing to increase. And also important to growth and also efficiency within the business. Sales productivity is probably the last one I would mention. Sales productivity, which means if you look at the sales reps' quotas, what percentage of their quota are they ultimately delivering? That's a byproduct of a lot of the other things I mentioned, but the efficiency in the way that you go to market and sales reps ultimately hitting their numbers is also critically important to attrition rates within a sales organization. I would probably be remiss if I didn't mention the macro environment that I think has shifted, particularly in SaaS, but possibly across multiple industries here. Companies for a very long period of time have been focused on top line revenue growth and often not paying attention to sort of bottom line profitability or income. And I think that particularly in our world, Randy, that in SaaS, we've seen a pretty dramatic shift in the last 3 to 6 months. Every time that I talk about the word efficiency and I can get more out of an organization, I'm also thinking about my organization. So sales productivity helps drive sales. Operational expense is at the expense of potentially being able to hire sales reps. And so I'm really paying attention to what is the overall cost envelope of my organization that's needed to grow. I'm trying to drive scale efficiency into my organization because every dollar that I can save and create a more efficient team are dollars that I could potentially reinvest in sales. And for every dollar that I reinvest in sales, on average, if you look at a sales quota compared to sales expense, it generates about $4 of revenue. That's on an ACV basis. If I think about having a decent gross retention rate with our customers and what that ultimately means on ARR, over time that compounds to about a $20 of revenue for every dollar of expense that I can save. So driving operational efficiency with my team is something that I'm constantly focused on.